Welcome back to Channel 514 and SPK Plus for the 6th episode in our series Exploring Ancient Literature. And this episode will be the first in which we move into Egyptian literature. And so, before launching into that, what I want to do first is say a few things about Egypt, about ancient Egyptian civilization. So, once again, I'm going to bring out a book that I used in our study in our 10-part series, the first of those, called Quality of Life and the Harper. And here's the book once again. It's the Oxford History of Ancient Egypt from Oxford University Press. And this was published sometime, I know it's in the 21st century, 2000, and again in '02. This paperback edition is probably from '02. So, in this book, here I am putting it down, but I want to show you something in this book. I'd like to take a look at a map, just the first map that I find, because there are quite a few in here. Well, here we are. So here's a map of Egypt. This is something you may well already be fairly familiar with, but you can see here's the Nile River, and so an important thing to remember is that the Nile Valley above the delta, because you see here there's a delta, so above the Nile Delta it's known as Upper Egypt, and up here in the delta it's called Lower Egypt. So upper is upstream, lower is downstream. Those are the two major divisions of the land. And because originally the upper and lower parts of Egypt were culturally and politically more distinct, the phrase the two lands is something you constantly find in Egyptian literature referring to Egypt on the whole. They'll call it the two lands. So here you have the Mediterranean, of course, and the desert on either side, and there are oases out in the desert. So that's all I really wanted to explain with the map. But there are also different periods in Egyptian history, and different kinds of literature prevail in different historical periods. So first you have prehistory. You have a series of prehistoric cultural periods that are named after different archaeological sites like Nakada and a few others. But then you have what's called an early dynastic period. Let me get to the table of contents in here because it's arranged by, period by period. So you have what's known as the pre-dynastic period, shortly before a united monarchy arose and united the two lands. And then you have a dynasty called Dynasty Zero, and then the First Dynasty, and on and on and on. Throughout Egyptian history, you have different dynasties of kings, and so I believe there are 31 or 32 of them. But first of all, well, the first major period in Egyptian literature, or history, sorry, is the Old Kingdom, and that's from circa 2686 to 2160 BC. Then you have what's called a First Intermediate Period, which goes down to 2055 BC. Then the Middle Kingdom, which is 2055 to 1650 BC, and then another intermediate period, the Second Intermediate Period, and that goes on to 1550 BC. So then you have the New Kingdom finally, and that's circa 1550 to circa 1069 BC, and then another intermediate period, the third of these, the third intermediate period, and that goes on to 664 BC. Then you have what's known as the late period, which goes to 332 BC, the time of the conquests of Alexander the Great. Then finally the Ptolemaic period, which is the reign of the dynasty descended from Ptolemy, the son of Lagos, who was an associate of Alexander the Great. And that goes on to 30 BC, the time of Roman conquest. Then you have the Roman period, which goes on to AD 395. So, and finally, not that it matters for our purposes here, but eventually there's a conquest by the Arabs in the time of the rise of Islam. And that, I believe, is in 642 BC. I'd have to look that up. I can never remember if it's 642 or 742, but anyway, we won't be reading any literature from the early dynastic or pre-dynastic period because I don't know of any. There might not be any. There is some art from that time that's interesting, and some of which we're going to be using in one of our studies in our series of 10 studies, but in this series we won't really have any occasion to use that. So where we're going to be beginning is actually in the Old Kingdom, and again that goes from about the middle of the 3rd millennium BC to the towards the end of that millennium, to the 22nd century BC. So the first text, really, that we're going to be looking at is called the Pyramid Texts, and I have it in this binder here because I printed this out years and years ago in our college library in college, and I read it about 9 years ago during the summer of '05, and so I still have it here today, and I'll show that to you in just a moment. But so it's fitting that we start with the pyramid texts, not only because they're the first big thing in Egyptian literature, but also because they well, how to put this? Because there are popular misconceptions about Egyptian civilization and culture that have come down to us in the modern period and contemporary times, largely by way of Western occultism and the New Age movement and the Egyptomania period of the 1920s or so, and the sort of hijacking and exploitation of Egyptian ideas and images, like pyramids, notably, in Western popular culture. And so, even today, we have different conspiracy theorists who will tell you, who have theories about, space aliens and lost civilizations somehow being responsible for the grandeur of Egyptian civilization, especially in the Old Kingdom, because that was when the pyramids were built. And so there's kind of a misconception that feeds into these hoaxes and these speculative ideas and well, all of these hoaxes, I'll just use that word again if the occasion comes up, because it's the most fitting word that I can think of at the moment. But the misconception that feeds into all of that is that there's something just inscrutably shadowy and mysterious about Egyptian history and what these people were up to and what thoughts were going through their heads and what they were really all about and what does it all mean. Oh, it's all so mysterious and we can't know anything about it. And the pyramids are the best example of that. So all of these of these speculative notions about who built them and how and where do they come from. Some of that is legitimate, just experimental archaeology, trying to figure out how things were built and all of that, but a lot of it is the exact opposite of legitimate. It's just jugglery, and the best something that establishes that and proves that is the existence of the pyramid texts. So take a moment and think about well, let's remember that throughout the 20th century and before that, in the late 19th century, when Egypt itself was under British rule and archaeology was developing as a science, and a lot of effort was put into studying the pyramids. And not only that, but all kinds of unscrupulous persons used the images of the pyramids and their aura of mystery and the mystique surrounding them to advance their own occult ideas or their own teachings and new ideas that they were working to introduce into the culture of the time in the modern West. One famous example is Charles Taze Russell, the founder of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, or the Jehovah's Witnesses. Russell himself was interested in pyramidology, whatever that really means, and he would use a series or a whole gallery of images from Egyptian culture that were making their way into the popular consciousness at that time in his publications. And ultimately he was, his tomb, it's you can find this on YouTube, it's well-known, relatively well-known, that Charles Taze Russell's tomb is made to look like a little pyramid, and it's inscribed in hieroglyphics, maybe bogus, made-up hieroglyphics, I don't know, but it's also located in a cemetery near some kind of important Masonic center or facility. And so that's what we Westerners have done with the pyramids on the worser side of the spectrum. Now, so why do I say this before I start talking about the pyramid texts? Well, because we might think to ourselves, what do we really know about these things? Or who are you to say Charles Taze Russell didn't know all about the pyramids, or all of these other characters, or these guys that are on the History Channel today, that they're not making all this stuff up and just messing with, muddying the waters and messing with people's minds. And in fact, there were recently 2 of these ancient astronauts guys, I believe they were German, and they were arrested in Egypt for purposely vandalizing a pyramid. I believe it was a pyramid and not some other kind of less spectacular Egyptian tomb. They vandalized it in order to advance whatever stupid theory they had. So, for the purposes of a hoax. So, hopefully justice will be done and harsh justice will be meted out to these mischief makers. But, so, if you're wondering, who am I to say all this? I'm just some guy making these videos on YouTube and Google+, and I don't work for a museum or a university. I don't have any advanced degrees in Egyptology or anything like that. I can't read hieroglyphics. But I don't have to, because anyone who wants to can go on sacredtexts.com or through some other channels. They can find out, you can either just find out without actually reading the texts, or they can find out about the texts and read them themselves, because the pyramid builders themselves, the people involved with the construction and the people involved with the government that commissioned the construction of these things, they actually left us reams and reams, really, of inscriptions inside different various pyramids. I believe there are 9 of them that the pyramid texts are collected from, 9 different pyramids. So this edition, I'll just hold up the first page of my printout here. It's published by Longmans, Green and Company in 1952, and the translator is a scholar named Samuel A.B. Mercer, and he was Professor Emeritus of Semitic Languages and Egyptology at Trinity College in the University of Toronto. So not just some guy trying to con people and make money and make a name for himself. So altogether, yes, I left a note here. These inscriptions were found on the walls of altogether 9 Old Kingdom pyramids. So the people who built these things, they left us a large body of literature telling us what these things meant to them and what the purpose of them was in Egyptian religious life. Now we can also theorize that perhaps so much effort was, so much manpower was devoted to construction projects and the building of monuments in ancient Egypt, partly because of the Nile being in flood for part of the year. So there was a good reason to have people occupied with projects that had a sense of great importance about them, because they weren't going to be working in the fields at that time. But in any case, what sort of religious and philosophical and spiritual notions were in the minds of these people, we know from what they wrote themselves. So we don't have to ask anyone today, because they told us. Now, there are many, many texts in here. They're divided into what are called utterances in this translation. So, for example, number 19, section 19, it's called here, In Praise of Nut, who's the sky goddess, a sort of personification of the sky, and the firmament, or, the moisture in the sky and all these things. So, In Praise of Nut, utterances 427 to 435. So you can see there are hundreds and hundreds of these utterances. Now, the idea you find in these texts that is most salient to us, and the one that really stands out when you study these things, and you could say the most important idea, just like in some of the Mesopotamian texts that we discussed, Atrahasis and Enuma Elish, the most important idea, or one of the key ideas, is that man suffers so that the gods do not have to suffer. And another is that the gods conquered these forces of chaos and formed our world out of a disordered mass. And so one of the most important ideas you would find in the pyramid texts is this idea that the king has a special religious significance, in that not only is he some kind of living god, or not only is he closer to the gods than his subjects, but that he, in death, he's going to ascend to the stars, and he's going to dwell among the gods. And the pyramids themselves are designed to help him do this. And so the ceremonies and the prayer and magic surrounding his burial is somehow supposed to secure for him his place among the stars. And of course it was thought that the stars exist endlessly, that they live forever, and that they are living beings. At this time that was a common idea. And so the phrase that's often used for in this text, the way it's often put in English is the imperishable stars. So the king is going to dwell among the imperishable stars. And there's one text even that talks about how not only is the king going to live with the gods and be among them and be equal with them or whatever, but he's actually so much more powerful than them that he's going to kill them and eat them. So he's going to have the big ones for breakfast or something, and the little ones for lunch. And then he's going to use the old sick ones to kindle the fire and heat up his cooking pot. But probably I could read just one or two of these, but I've basically introduced the most important idea here. It's about the king getting up to the stars. And at this time in Egyptian history, the average person, they were buried in a certain way that showed a belief in an afterlife, that they were going to some place. But at this time, there was much less, or the funerary cult that we think of as so quintessentially Egyptian. It existed at this time, but it was more primitive, and one's closeness, one's proximity in social life to the king sort of determined how grand a burial one could pull off for oneself. So the high officials of the time, they could be buried in the shadow of the pyramid or somewhere in the near vicinity of the pyramid, and they tended to be buried in these flat-topped stone tombs called mastabas. So I may as well read just one or two of these texts, but as I said, we already have the idea, really. Now, just arbitrarily, I'm picking these out pretty much at random, and in the way this is translated here, when you get to when it gets to where the king's name would be in this in the prayer or the incantation, the translator puts the letter N, so it's whatever king it was, so when I get to the N, I'll say the king, just so you know, you're not thinking like N, what is N, So this is going to be utterance 480. So it goes like this: to say, meaning this is what you're supposed to read or recite. To say, how beautiful indeed is the sight, how elevating indeed is the sight, the ascension of this God, the King, to heaven, like the ascension of Father Atum to heaven. His renown over him, his magic on both sides of him, his terror before him, after he, Atum, has brought to the king the cities, assembled for the king the nomes, united for the king the, then there's a word that's just rendered in all consonants, so I'm not going to guess how to pronounce it. United for the king the blank lands. He who had spoken concerning it is Geb, hereditary prince of the gods, the regions of Horus, the regions of Set, the marsh of reeds. They praise the king as blank, who is chief of the land of Upper Egypt, as blank, who is chief of the land of Nubia, as Supdu, who lives under his blank trees. They bring the ladder for the king. They set up the ladder for the king. They raise the ladder for the king. The blank ladder comes. The blank ladder comes. Thy name comes as the gods named it. Those who have ascended are come. Those who have ascended are come. Those who have climbed up are come. Those who have climbed up are come. Those who have lifted themselves up like Shu are come. Those who have lifted themselves up like Shu are come. The king ascends on the hips of Isis. The king climbs up on the hips of Nephthys. The father of the king, Atum, lays hold of the arm of the king. He appoints the king as chief of those gods. the nimble, the wise, the imperishables. Behold this which you have said, ye gods, that the king would not again be at your head. Behold, the king remains as he who is at your head, as the surviving bull of the wild bulls. So that's utterance 480. Now, just to keep roughly the same train of thought here, or let's hope it keeps roughly the same train of thought, I'll read utterances 481 and 482. So here's number 481. To say, look out, his face behind him, ferry the king over. The two reed floats of heaven are placed, that the king may ferry over therewith to Re, to the horizon. The two reed floats of heaven were placed for Re, that he might ferry over therewith to Horus of the gods, to the horizon. The two reed floats of heaven are placed for the king, that the king may ferry over therewith to Re, to the horizon. The king will ferry over to his station on the eastern side of the sky, in its northern region, among the imperishable stars, who stand on by their blank scepters, who stand on their eastern standard. The king will stand among them. The brother of the king is the moon. The mother of blank is, the mother of the king is the morning star. Give thine arm to the king, that he may live. And now 482. To say, O father Osiris the king. They're calling him Osiris here because it's traditional that the deceased in these, the deceased king is called the Osiris. So, which is the god who's supposed to rule over the dead, who's also associated with agriculture and vegetation, but he was supposed to rule over the dead. So, the dead king it's a traditional practice that the dead king in this kind of literature is referred to as Osiris. So, to say, O father Osiris the king, raise thyself from thy left side, put thyself on thy right side, toward this fresh water which I have given to thee. O father Osiris the king, raise thyself from thy left side, put thyself on thy right side, toward this warm bread which I have made for thee. O father Osiris the king, the double doors of heaven are open for thee, the double doors of the bows are open for thee. The gods of Buto are filled with compassion. When they come to Osiris at the voice of lamentation of Isis and Nephthys, the souls of Buto dance for thee. They beat their flesh for thee. They smite their arms for thee. They dishevel their hair for thee. They say to Osiris, Thou art gone, thou art come, thou art awake, thou wast asleep, thou remainest alive. Stand up, see this, stand up, hear this, what thy son has done for thee, what Horus has done for thee. He beats him who beats thee, he binds him who binds thee, he puts him under his great daughter who is in blank. It is thy great sister who collected thy flesh, who gathered thy hands, who sought thee, who found thee upon thy side on the shore of blank, so that morning ceased in the two blank palaces. Ye gods, speak to him, bring him to you. But thou shalt ascend to heaven, thou shalt become blank. That looks like the name of one of the gods there, but I'm not going to try and pronounce it. Thy son Horus leads thee on the ways of heaven. Heaven is given to thee, earth is given to thee, the marsh of reeds is given to thee, together with those two great gods who come from Heliopolis. So, So that's a sample of what you find in the pyramid texts, and having explained what that is and introduced our series of videos on Egyptian literature, I'll stop this in just a moment, but soon, or in our next few videos, probably 2 or 3, maybe just 2, but we'll discuss mythological texts, classics that relate to stories about the gods, just like we did in our section on Mesopotamia. And after that, there are a lot of different genres that we can discuss. There are inscriptions written by or written for the kings, for their monuments. There is literature connected to the mortuary cult, like the coffin texts or the so-called Book of the Dead. Um, there are literary works, really stories, that aren't about the gods, but are just sort of have some kind of meaning connected to some other subject, like human affairs or um, adventures, different sort of fictional adventures that people have. Um, there are wisdom texts, kind of like what you find in the Old Testament, sometimes ascribed to a particular king or to a scribe or a vizier. And let's see, what else? What else is there? Well, those are some of the major genres anyway. There are also these kind of philosophical poems, like "The Man Who Was Weary of Life" is one famous example. And so Egyptian literature really is more diverse and more broad than we tend to think. We tend to think of what we've kind of seen in museums um, or what we've seen in movies, or kind of what's really made its way into the popular consciousness. So fewer people are really aware of all the breadth and depth of literature that this civilization developed over time. So it really is a mistake to think that these are just these mysterious people who left these mute stone statues, and we can't connect with them, or we can't really think about or reflect on what they were saying, or what was on their minds, um, because they really did have a lot to say, and we have a lot of it today in that's available even just to a popular audience, to the general reader, and not only to specialists. So, um, and that's why I have an interest in it and some acquaintance with it and familiarity with it myself, even not being a specialist. Um, so that seems like I've probably said enough uh, to set the tone, or lay the groundwork for what we're going to be doing for the rest of this series. And after this series, of course, we'll be moving on into classical cultures, so Greek and Roman literature. But there you have it. Our foray into Egypt begins, and I hope you're enjoying this so far. And hopefully there will be a lot for you to enjoy coming very soon. And so please don't be a stranger, and join us anytime you like. And we'll be seeing you. So have a great. It's the end of the weekend, so I hope you had a great Sunday, and have a great week beginning tomorrow. So thanks again.